right, here we are at my drawing board, and I've done a Wrightson-esque drawing here, as I think any fan of Wrightson can really tell. Got all kinds of Wrightson-esque aspects to it. So let me talk about how I went about this. First off, I wanted to pick a character that Wrightson's known for, and that's in this case it's Eerie. Got this wonderful book right here. The Creepy Presents Berni Wrightson. There are so many of his best stories in here. Highly recommend. So in the back, he has his front papers of some issues he did, showing his the characters that represented each of the Eerie and Creepy magazines. So I used that as a reference. This one in particular, showing this character here, and of course I had to come up with some other position for him to be in, some other activity, and I thought, well, I'm going to do something fun, so I showed him on the toilet. I don't know if that's respectful or disrespectful. I think it's kind of funny. Like a good illustrator, I decided to get some reference, and here's my iPad showing all the reference that I use for different illustrations. And in this case, my lovely wife helped me create myself as a reference. Oh wait, I haven't put it on here yet. So as you can see, I've been doing some zombie work lately. She didn't care for that wig at all. No, the reference is actually on my iPhone. So I'm going to show it to you nice and small because it potentially could feel a little embarrassing. Let's see, where is it? There it is. There's my reference. So I got a nice thick button-down shirt on that would give me some nice thick Wrightson-esque folds, which he has a lot of in the clothing that he puts on his characters. Got my butt down in front of a camera here, and looked at the camera to try and help emulate the lighting. In the end, though, I took a little bit of liberty, which you won't find a lot of just slavish devotion to the folds in the clothing here. It is really a reference, but I made sure the light was directly above. And I indicated a lot of places where there really is not, I decided there's not going to be any light, so that it's nice and stark like a Wrightson illustration. And of course I use the Creepy book as a reference for how the character Eerie is supposed to look. And then when it comes to the legs and everything, there's not really a whole heck of a lot of use for reference down there. Don't really need a lot because it'll be in shadow. Oh, but now that I think about it, I don't think I have two different legs here, so I'm just gonna bring this one in as a silhouetted leg in behind, and just have it join with that shadow of the pants underneath. There we go. So somehow I will indicate a separation right there. So what are the aspects of Wrightson's art that I'm trying to capture? And here they are. Here's a list. Livid Blacks. And by Livid Blacks, what I mean is joining up nearby black and sometimes white areas to create a gestalt kind of feeling, a gestalt effect in the viewer. That is, let the viewer's eye put things together. And you can kind of see that in this illustration of this character right here, where I've left lots of the white areas right along the edge of his shirt. I'll let them join in with the white areas of the glass behind. And likewise, let lots of the black areas in front of the shirt join in with his neck, and let that join in with his face and join in with his hair, allowing the viewer to just sort of connect these seemingly disparate pieces in their mind's eye, and it creates a kind of a joyful effect in the viewer. So I have a lot of areas like that in this drawing, where a lot of these blacks will just be very contiguous, and contiguous means all connected, all from the floor all the way up to his head, blocking some things out but allowing the mind to connect those pieces. A second and really underappreciated aspect of Wrightson's work is the very careful line work that he uses. There's not going to be any very slapdash line work. I'm not going to be whipping lines out here. The beginning and end of each line is going to be very carefully attended to. The width of each line, the number of lines, their direction, and their progression within any particular hatch. So in other words, what I mean by progression is it's not going to be just a bunch of lines that just go all in the same direction, unless I'm defining something mechanical, something constructed like this wooden edifice or this toilet bowl at the top here that you can't really see it. There it is. So I guess what I mean by a solid silhouette is making sure that the lights and the blacks in the artwork maintained a nice, clear, quick, and easy to read silhouette. In other words, this will probably be all black under here, and then this area in here will be white, and then this far leg will be black. Just making sure that everything is as clear as possible and not gummed up too much with too much either edge detail or hatching detail. And finally, what I think of as really the most important aspect of Wrightson's work, and one that is usually an aspect that's usually approached in a very haphazard or slapdash manner by most comic book artists, is to put it a little stridently, obedience to the light source. Paying attention to where the light source is coming from and trying to understand the volume and the space that the figure exists in relation to that light source. Now, I won't get into the draftsmanship very much of this because I think Wrightson was, at least at one point, a far superior draftsman to me. I would just hope to get to that point. But draftsmanship really is the soul of that's where the soul of the artist really lives in, and the kinds of shapes that you make, and the character of the lines, and the character of everything you draw of the characters. So, but to ink and to make artwork that looks like something, looks like what Wrightson paid attention to in his artwork, following the light source and obeying the light source is really key. He really cared about where the light was falling on his character, and where, say, one thing was in front of another thing, casting a shadow from one part onto another. So just to talk about that a little bit, there are really two aspects of light and how it behaves on an object that I pay attention to, especially with my background in 3D illustration and animation. There's shading. So in other words, if I were to just draw a ball right here, and the light source is coming from above, as it is with this character, the shading would indicate that it would be darker underneath on the opposite side of the light source, right? But what if there's something in the way? What if there's like a bar hanging up somehow right above that? That's a shadow, and that would cast a shadow across that ball in this way. So there's shading and there's shadows. And actually, there's a tertiary aspect, and you'll see this more prominently in Wrightson's work than in mine even, and that's bounce light. In other words, if the main light source is from above, and there's something from below, especially if that something from below is rather light in color, it will bounce light off of that object down below and back up onto the object above it, creating sort of a dark edge somewhere in the middle. But really what it does, it creates another lighted area on the bottom. And the only place you'll see potentially a dark area is between the two light sources. And Wrightson was really genius at working these two light sources, even if it wasn't readily apparent in the illustration where the bounce light was coming from. And that's not something I really pay too much attention to. I'll have a little bit of that going on down here, but not terribly much. So it's really a lot. Most of the heavy lifting is done here with the draftsmanship, drawing out all of the different hatches and figuring out where all the black areas are. I don't have X's indicating all of my black areas because I drew this. It's for me. I don't have to pass this on to someone else. and show them where all the black areas are. Since I'm inking it, I know where they all are. So without further ado, I'm going to start laying some ink down. Okay, I took a sip of coffee. That was some ado going on right there. So, just like with any comic book illustration or ink illustration, for the most part, I think it's always prudent to start with the areas you are sure will be black. So hit all those harsh black areas first. I'll be talking a little bit about different aspects of this as I'm inking it. So one of those aspects that you might be wondering about, what is the board that I'm working on? What is the ink I'm working on? None of this really matters terribly too much, but it's a really nice thick Bristol board. It's a Strathmore. It says 400, so it's probably about twice as thick as your standard comic book page. Also has a little bit of tooth on it. I like a little bit of tooth these days because it helps me not get too noodly. Tooth, especially if you're working in pencil, tooth can help you to if there's no tooth, if it's really, really smooth, it can kind of impel you to focus perhaps too much on really fine line work, and that is a problem I have. I try and get too detailed with things. So having a board with a texture, that texture gets in the way of a certain level of fineness in my line work and helps me focus on the big picture more. So I'm being very careful. I have these nice, solid, clear indications. That's started out a little thick there. I'm rotating my brush to make sure I get the nice tip on it. There we go. I'll have to go in maybe and clean up that first line. That's how noodly I get. That first line wasn't right. I'll have to white out just that one line. There we go. So I tell this to my students a lot. When they ask where to start, I say, look at your drawing, get inspired about something that you want to paint or ink, whatever the project is, and do the things that call out to you first, the things that you're sure of. And the more excited you are, and I have to say the more experienced you are, the more clear that will become for you, and the more inspired you will be, because your clarity of vision and what you want to do on each drawing will just fill you with excitement for doing this and then for doing that and doing all these fun little bits. So my brush is a very inexpensive synthetic brush. It's from Dick Blick or Utrecht Blick Scholastic Wonder White. If it comes to a tip, that's my favorite brush. That's all I really care about. And these do for a time, and if I keep them nice and clean, they will maintain their tips and give me the level of the degree of detail that I require. Now, this is a number 1, and I'm doing my best, as I mentioned before, to kind of pull back on the hyper detail, hyperly-ish, whatever, detail, amount of detail that I tend to get a little carried away with. Trying to make my inking a little more fun. So that's why I've gone back to a 1, and I have been using a 00. I guess if I were to say there's a lesson in here, it would be to continue re-examining what you're trying to accomplish. Don't let an attempt to be consistent at all times and maintain a hyper consistent style stop you from questioning whether the style that you're working in is suiting you or not. Always try new things. And the question one of the questions I'm always asking myself is this looking the way I want it to look? Are the results making me happy? And is this the direction I want to go in? And like one of my second favorite ink artist is Berni Wrightson. And you know what he inked in? He used a fountain pen. And I tried to find a fountain pen with a tiny flexible nib. Something that could approach a 00 brush or a crow quill pen. And you know what? None of them do. And what I finally realized is that none of them should. Really, it's when I look at Winsor Smith's early stuff, not the Weapon X stuff, although that's fine. I think that's brush work right there. It is kind of clunky in a gorgeous kind of way. It's really kind of clunky. And the way, and that's not really the appeal. And maybe he got in there with a little fine brush work, but or maybe he worked a little extra large. I'm not sure. That's always a time-honored way of making your artwork look more refined. Work larger, and then when it's shrunk down, then there's all this more detail packed into it. So while I'm inking here, I'm asking myself, are there bits of detail in these shadows that I should elaborate on? So, for example, here between the shirt and the glute, should I have put some bounce light underneath? And of course I went no, that's not what I want. And I say of course because I've already inked it, so it's all done. But it's going to happen. It's going to happen that in some case somewhere I'm going to go, that could use a little bounce light definition in the black area. So right now, I just reloaded my brush. I'm going to get rid of some of that because I want to do a little bit of hatching here. So I'm going to go back over here. There we go. Where does the hatch start? How thick and thin should it be? Where should it end? All valid questions. Okay, that's good. There's that. Fill in this a little bit. I'm really kind of excited at this moment about this shirt. So I'm going to unload my brush so I can get a finer point. Define that solid black edge area. And then there. Okay. It's a little bright in that there is some solid unhatched white in there. I'm going to leave that because it's always easier to make something inkier than whitier with white out. It's easier to make it darker than they have to go in and change that. Now the shirt ostensibly is a white shirt. And white objects do catch light and are brighter in their shadows. But trying not to think about that too much. Want to make sure that these light and dark areas maintain a nice solid shape. Keep that silhouette enhanced. There's a lot of folds and such to break this up, and so there. So this is like the side of his leg. You got that split. I forget the name of the muscle. That split that happens on the side of your thigh between the top, between the quads on the top, and your hamstrings in the back. Gotta get that sharp edge to the brush. Here we go. And that's what this detail area is. It's kind of fun to be filling in these black areas and kind of seeing it all come together. So this is supposed to be the top of his thigh right here. And I'm not crazy about how much of that is lit. So I'm just going to go, but I'm not sure what to do. So what I find is if I want to do an area, but I'm not sure how it's supposed to be, kind of goes back to what I mentioned. I tell my students, work on something you are sure about. And eventually, as things come together, it will inform you about the areas, what to do with the areas you're not sure about. Clean the brush off, treat it nicely. There we go. In case all that ink is drying in the ferrule, that's the metal part where the bristles connect. Really, I like to really beat it up in the water, so it's clean as I can get. There we go. Refill it up. Get it nice and saturated. Okay. So I'm wondering about the bounce light on the butt, and I think what I've decided is right there, just in that spot, right here. It's going to be nice and solid. It's going to be curved. It's curved up under too far to catch the bounce light from the toilet seat, except for this one area right here. So I'm going to define that edge, and I'm going to throw some hatches in there to darken it up. There we go. That's too much right there. Okay. Go up this arm a bit. So everywhere I put ink, I'm just really cognizant of, well, is this the shape that I really want it to be in? Do I want any more detail in here? Is there some place I should be like just blacking off so that it's a clearer, more solid shape, or does it need more elaboration? That is just a balance that is just always on my mind when I'm inking. Or should it be simpler or should it be more elaborated? Which? Okay. I'm not even sure about this fold right here. Well, let's get this going here. Find that tip. It's not too sharp. There we go. One really big difference that you might have already noticed between Wrightson's work and mine is that I go for a single hatch. I like a single hatch. I don't like cross hatching. So I'll make a single hatch, and then if I feel it needs some variation inside for the purposes of shading, then I will manually go in there and thicken or thin it here and there with additional detail to the hatches themselves. I'm not going to add more cross hatches. Rather, I'm going to thick or thin out the existing hatches. Just a personal preference. Now someday I hope to take on more of a Barry Windsor Smith technique, and you'll see that in some of my work here and there, in that there are hatches. He uses hatches, but they're so beautifully and carefully done, and that they enhance the work. They add something extra. They're just gorgeous hatches. They look like almost like chain mail. And there is just a really impressive focus and skill that goes into making those like that. And occasionally I can do it. So just to point out, you know, with the focus that I have on these techniques and processes that I've defined, these aspects of Wrightson's work that I'm emulating, it's not going to come out absolutely perfect every time. But hopefully there'll be an overall feeling to it that I'm looking for, and the things I'm trying to achieve will happen here, at least here and there in my work. And the overall impression will come through. So let's see here. Okay. So I'm getting further along here, and it's hard to avoid having to do some hatching. So I'm going to go someplace where I don't have to. I really want to keep enhancing the harsh blacks here. Another aspect of Wrightson's work, lots of organic shapes. You won't see a lot of, well, I mean, he did buildings and cars and all that stuff like we all have to, but I mean, just look at Swamp Thing and a lot of the one-offs, the prints that he did. It's either figures or natural elements, kind of like a lot like Frazetta. Frazetta didn't do a lot of buildings when he did. They all looked the same. Buildings aren't really known for being terribly exciting things to draw. Personally, whenever I can, I minimize how many of those I have to do. So right here at the edge of the bowl, I'm gonna just do a little bit of a hatch here to suggest a little bounce light. There we go. I'm going to do a little cut in here to suggest a little light catching the rim of that toilet bowl. But for the most part, it's all going to be black. One thing that hatching does, it draws attention to an area. So if you want an area to be boring, Black it out, like Wally Wood said, when in doubt, black it out. So, do I keep the toilet lid and the toilet bowl separate? And I say no, join it all together. There's a bit of a lip there, and then let the viewer's brain fill in all the details. So a little bit of an edge there. That's enough of that. Continue it. There we go. There's the edge. Bring it on down. And then fill in everything else. Now some of these cut-ins for the sake of bounce light, when I get this all done, they'll seem superfluous. They won't add anything to the artwork. And I will black them out. But best to maintain that visual information for now if you're not sure, and then you can always black it out later. I am really liking that toilet bowl. It's like my favorite part right now because it's done. The done parts are the best. No, it is really, really simple and clear. I think there'll be some bounce light here. Get some chunky hatches in there. There we go. Going around that little bolt knob there. If anybody else ever swapped out a wax gasket in the toilet, you know what I mean. So there's one thing: in the brightest areas you'll have the fewest hatch lines, and to those of you who are experienced, you'll know what I mean. There'll be a higher contrast in the bright areas, so you won't see much, if any, shading other than the highest the black and the white. And that is another aspect of Berni's stuff. Lots of high contrast areas. It's the idea, if there's an actual thought besides making it look cool, I think is to emulate moonlight, which is, I guess, what any good horror illustrator would try and do whenever possible. I got lots of hatching on the sides here as the light gets further away from the area I'm drawing. Ooh, this could be fun. Let's see. I'm going to give that a solid edge on the bottom. And I think I'll just... There we go. So this is what we mean by progression. So these are going to get closer together and darker as I keep going here. Oh, I'm also running out of ink. Gotta go slower. I don't know how that's working. I think that might be a mistake. So I'm going to elaborate a bit, a little thickness near the top here. we'll see how that continues to play as I go along. Okay, oh, I got a little butt shadow here. One way I might be inking differently than other artists is I do hold on to my ink bottle as I ink. I just try to minimize whatever interruptions in my flow, in my technique, as much as possible. Okay, I really got to tackle these two areas, the thigh and the butt, but I think I'll finish up this stuff on the back first. Got a nice point here. I'm just going to really be careful here. One aspect of my line work, it's kind of two facets really. Tends to be not as clean and smoothly done as a lot of artists. On the other hand, I do tackle a lot more longer lines, longer areas of blending and shading, and that's kind of a hallmark of my own work. So longer distances, not just quick short hatches, but I'll try and tackle hatches that go a longer distance than most artists. And have a wider variation between light and dark from one end to the other. Something that most ink artists would try and tackle. Let's see. With a cross hatch rather than a single hatch. So in doing so, my line work tends to be a little bit shakier, not as smooth. There we go. Oh yeah, this is inside, so nice chunky thick hatches there. Now is that good? I don't think so. I'm just gonna black it out. I'm gonna say that's better. Okay. Okay, I think I'm ready to do this top of his thigh. Here. I'm not crazy about that. I'm thinking it should go. Here goes, gone. Thinking the side of his leg, gone, 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 gone. Maybe some sort of detail I should add in white out later on there, but I'm just not sure what. Right now, I'm just sure that I'm glad I changed that. I was unsure about that the whole time. Okay, so I know that I want some thick hatches here. So, got a big fully loaded brush. Okay, back of the butt. Okay, I think there's a crucial area, the butt. Very crucial. Just unload my brush a bit here. Is that visible? Okay. Doing the same kind of line I had done on the top of the thigh, where it starts out very thin and suddenly gets very fat, delicate, and then I squash it at the end. I kind of like that. I may have to do an extra little bit of blending at the end of each line. Make it go into the black more seamlessly. Again, I tend to retouch my lines rather than using a crosshatch. I think that crosshatches can be kind of messy. And I like the directness, the intention of a single hatch line. So let's get this little knob thing in here. Gentle curvature at the bottom. Flat top. Okay, got that. Black edge here, all connected. This edge here would catch a highlight, it being ceramic and shiny. At the very least, it would catch a highlight on the edge. So I'm going to leave that edge as I black everything else out. What I like to do sometimes is when I'm making a white edge inside something, work with the incongruity of whatever line I had made to break up that line a little bit. It feels a little more natural, and although it doesn't emulate necessarily the material, I find it tends to emulate the way we see things. When we look in the dark, we don't necessarily see something unbroken. Our sight is very poor in the dark. So I'm emulating the poor eyesight that we all have in the dark. Okay, there's the bottom of the toilet seat. I really like how after working for a bit, for an hour, sometimes only half hour, I finally start getting quick and fluid with my inking. So same thing here, I'm going to join this shadow at the edge. This is the butt shadow. That Cat Stevens song, I'm being followed by a butt shadow. And it all joins up in the darkest areas where you wouldn't, where no bounce light can go. Shadow off the pants now. This would be a nice shadow cast by his arm. Gonna get into a little detail here. Gotta be careful so I preserve my careful draftsmanship. Of pants. When I'm done, we'll have a little post-mortem, look at what's working and what doesn't, throw some white out on the areas that are not. Now, one aspect of doing any kind of art is that as you get into it more, as you spend some time on it during the day, your decisions become more fluid, more often correct. I've been doing this for about an hour so far, and some of the decisions I've made up around here, say hatching wise, maybe they will be revisited. But I know that if I were inking all day, I would would make fewer decisions that would need to be revisited and worked on again. One aspect of this is, I mean, if I haven't shaded my artwork in, as I have not here, then I can kind of get lost in this puzzle of of suggested blacks and whites, and I could actually end up making something black that I had intended to be white. So it takes a little bit of extra concentration, unless I'm going to be inking everything. Sorry, unless I'm going to be drawing everything in pencil beforehand and shading everything in pencil. I have all these little tiny details down here. I have to be very careful that I'm not putting black where white's supposed to be. This is just my interpretation of and simplification of my own pants bunched up around my ankles. That's the thing about inking, you gotta simplify that stuff. But again, really, you gotta have reference if you're gonna do a good job of it. Otherwise, you just end up making the same picture over and over again with only little minor changes. Slightly skewed angle of view, same facial expressions. I mean, you see it with all the greats. Wrightson stopped paying attention to character. All his characters started looking the same. I mean, there's plenty of greats that just made the same facial expression over and over again. Just stop kind of trying. To stop exploring. Personally, I feel every picture I make is an opportunity to try something new. Can work to my detriment when people want more of what I already do. This is the fine line we all gotta draw as artists. Again, I'm keeping the white lines inside the dark areas really loose and letting them connect or not connect kind of on a whim. Sometimes it's planned out, but sometimes it's actually planned out to be loose. And again, it's It's hard to take my eyes off my work when working in dark areas, especially because I don't want to make a spot that should be black white, or should be white black. That'd be bad.